let's get going. Thanks everybody for being here today. We'll kick this off, and I'll turn it over to Avril to get us started.
Thank you. Are there any items on the agenda for the night that you need for us to go over briefly before we start on the rest of the meeting for today? On the consent agenda tonight, we haven't had a chance to do the pre-meetings for this, so that's why we'll just run briefly through the agenda. Tonight you have a couple of budget amendments to move money from existing capital projects that came in under budget to complete some ones that came in over budget. You'll see that on consent items. You will have the public hearing on the budget as well as the economic development incentives. This will be the second read for the solid waste franchise agreement tonight. And we have two small new business items that we want to discuss with you. One, the creation of the Recreation Parks and Greenways Committee, and location of where media can stand when they've been boards.
So just one thing I wanted to just make sure everyone's aware on the economic development hearings. So the numbers that are outlined there are what the organization's requested. Based on our deliberations, they are not what we are expecting to actually do, but for the purposes of the hearings, we listed the maximum that theoretically could be approved, right? So that it's covered. If we did decide, hey, let's give them the full amount, that we've covered, the public hearing has addressed that. But those are not the amounts that, based on our discussions, we are actually planning on approving. Just so make sure everyone's, you see those numbers, like, oh my gosh, that's way higher than what I thought it was going to be. It's, in most cases, not what we're actually planning to spend.
Thank you for answering my question.
All right. All right.
So if there's no questions on it, then we can move into our pre-meeting, which will be Rachel, will be first up, affordable housing update.
Great.
Good afternoon.
Hey.
Matt Cable from the Planning Department and I, Rachel Nygaard from Strategic Partnerships, are here to provide an update to you about the work of the Affordable Housing Committee. Once we share some information from staff, those members of the committee, Commissioners Belcher and Edwards, and then Chairman Newman, if there is other information that you want to share with the other members of the board, we offer you that opportunity. As a reminder, affordable housing is one of the strategic priorities for Buncombe County. And we established a committee, which is the subcommittee of the Board of Commissioners, for the purpose of community engagement, gathering information from members of the public and community partners related to housing affordability, and making recommendations on both policy and funding. We've had 3 meetings so far, meeting monthly, on the third Tuesday of each month on our Board of Commissioners Day in the afternoon. And we've been working on reviewing affordable housing investments and strategy and partnerships. And today we're going to share information about the home investments, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a second, as well as the Affordable Housing Services Program and one of the projects that's recommended for funding within that for the coming fiscal year. Briefly, before we get into those, this is a snapshot of the ways that Buncombe County makes investments in affordable housing. From left to right, the Affordable Housing Services Program is sort of our largest area of investment. This is administered through the Planning Department and has an annual application process and supports a wide variety of various different kinds of housing projects, from new construction to home repairs, funding to community-based organizations. We also have HOME, which we'll talk about more in a second. This is a federal funding that is invested through a regional 4-county housing consortium, of which Buncombe County participates, and the City of Asheville is the lead agency for. We also have special projects, although at your direction, the Board of Commissioners, as well as the work of this committee, our effort is to roll in the future those special projects into a more consolidated process into the Affordable Housing Services Program. But special projects in the past have included things like Lee Walker Heights funding, partnering with Mountain Housing for East Haven apartments. And finally, we have a range of supportive contracts and grants that may be homelessness service funding or other funding partnerships that are associated with affordable housing, but not directly administered through the planning department. Like one of the strategic partnership grants that you all are recommending for funding, it's on the proposed list for discussion, to On Track Financial Education and Counseling, which does some home buyer education. I'll allow Matt to cover briefly the recommendation around the home program.
Sure. The home program match total investment is $123,114. That includes an annual budgeted amount of $75,000 as well as additional funding from prior year program income. So that money is returned to the county as a programmatic income, and then returned home program match funds where it was unused. The recommendation of the committee is to support the creation of 23 different units with that investment. That includes $87,908 to support Workforce Homestead Incorporated, the Jasper Project. This is a 100-unit apartment complex located at the intersection of Warren Wilson Road and US 70 in the Swananoa area. And this project received the actual home allocation through the consortium. They did not receive their full request of $400,000, and so this recommended application of funding would bring them to their full request. It is a multifamily rental construction project. They are seeking a tax credit for that particular project. This would give them the full request that they had made. And then the tax credit project, we should know about the award for that particular tax credit in August of this year. So we'll know if that project advances or not. In the event it doesn't advance, that's typically when we might see a return of funds. They'll seek those tax credits again, go back through the whole process. So that information will certainly be shared with you at that point. Additionally, the balance of the $123,000, which is just over $35,000, is recommended to support the Asheville Area Habitat for Humanity project. This is a 4-unit single-family development. It's an infill parcel of 1.5 acres off of Brevard Road. Their original request was for $100,000 for the home process. This is the balance that we had available that we will be offering to Habitat. It supports roughly 1.4 units, so just between 1 and 2 units. But with that project, they can seek additional funds through the Affordable Housing Services Program or other avenues to support that particular development.
We also are bringing information about recommendation for the upcoming fiscal year's Affordable Housing Services Program. The committee had discussion on this item at their most recent meeting, and we'll talk to you a little bit more about the old Haywood development from Asheville Area Habitat for Humanity in a second. And that is being included as a portion of this fund, recommended at an amount of $680,800, as well as $49,000 for the mobile home removal program, and then a large sum, $501,795 left at this time, unprogrammed or available to be allocated through the process, which will be coming up in the next few weeks, related to the annual cycle for Affordable Housing Services Program. A portion of this recommendation, which I just wanted to highlight, was the committee in selecting the amount to recommend for Habitat for Humanity's Old Haywood development, had reduced by $88,155, and the recommendation of the committee was to reduce the overall Affordable Housing Services Fund by that amount, rather than to return it to another project. So a recommended budget reduction, which the county manager will speak to in budget hearing presentation later this evening. So the board action on this would be budget adoption, which is scheduled for the 18th of June.
So the Old Haywood Neighborhood Project, this is for phase one. It's a two-phase project that will include $680,800. That was the recommendation of the committee to apply funding. Purposes of that are for down payment assistance. So that's actually to assist Habitat for Humanity in covering full cost of the home and making that home available to the home buyer. So thereby reducing their investment as a home buyer in the property, giving them that down payment assistance. This is to be paid out to Habitat in FY 2020. So as Rachel mentioned, it's contingent on the budget approval later this month. And Habitat will be presenting information about the project more fully at a future board.
And at that time, we'll have an opportunity to vote on the contract, and the motion would be to allow the manager to enter into that contract and execute it. So you'll have an opportunity to formally approve this project. Here are some basics about what you'll hear from them at that time.
Right, and so the total project is for a 98-unit project. There are 38 units in phase one. Construction is actually already underway. We started doing some work on the property. They're scheduled excuse me, to complete the phase one by spring of 2023, so it's a fairly quickly moving project. The total phase one financing is $6.8 million. They have previously received an Affordable Housing Services Program award of $240,000. And so that purposes was part construction loan and part down payment assistance. And so the recommendation from the committee provides additional down payment assistance, but falls completely within the program parameters of the cap of $20,000 per unit. Those two separate being combined.
Looking ahead to the coming months, we'll be, like I mentioned, working on the application process for the next cycle of Affordable Housing Services Program, working with community partners Homeward Bound, who the committee heard from at the most recent committee meeting about a development project that organization is working on, focusing on people who are chronically homeless, as well as engagement with various community partners also working in the affordable housing space. So ask if there are any questions and or turn it over to the commissioners who are members of this committee.
I'd only make one comment on this. They have an 89% success ratio on this.
On the Homeward Bound project.
Right.
Right. And so we're thinking that might be a significant project in our next funding cycles, in our next budget.
That's an architectural drawing, a mock-up of the building that would be the Asheville Buncombe House by Homeward Bound that's on the screen. And so, correct, we had spoken with them earlier in this fiscal year. The project is evolving somewhat, and the timing at that, when we talked about it last, they were thinking that they may request an FY20 funding, and they have not. They would be likely to request FY21 funding.
So the commission will receive a full presentation at that time, once they brief.
Once we make a recommendation on it,
Just a quick question. In some of our conversations in the past, we've used the Affordable Housing Services Program and Housing Trust kind of interchangeably. And I just wondered, are you all thinking about those as kind of the same thing? Is there a technical distinction that, just because I want to make sure I'm using the right terms as I talk with community members about this. And
I think now that we have the committee, and we have been talking about
Yeah.
that question, right? And so this idea of like special projects, just kind of these big things that kind of might come out of wherever. Just speaking for myself, my sense is that over time this might all kind of merge together into more of like, this is our pool of affordable housing funds that the county's investing, and looking at that in a more kind of a way that all those funds are kind of considered together and in a competitive process where we invite, we basically say, here's how much money we have to spend, community, come forward with your best ideas. And so the sort of special projects and affordable housing services fund might eventually kind of get merged together more, but it's
Okay.
we haven't done that, but that's just been sort of my sense for how this might evolve over time.
And that's not a term that we've been using at the committee levels, housing
Yeah.
trust, but it functions much like
Like
that.
housing,
Other
yeah.
jurisdictions call their
Okay.
funds housing trust funds. I'm thinking about the budget office, if that language is in any of our budget documents, I don't think that it is.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, I think the other thing, you get into, legal definitions of what a term is, and we have to be really careful about that, about what a committee is, what a trust is, and so on. But for me, I was just educated on what they have being on the board, on the affordable housing board, allowed me to be educated on some of the things that we were doing, and how they were doing, how those were being implemented in the community. So that was very helpful.
It would not be a trust fund, because we haven't set it aside specifically for that.
Okay.
But he said it'd be legal terms
Yeah.
where you say the word trust. So it's just a affordable housing program or services,
Yeah.
special projects.
So trust would be a special designation that we, at
Well,
some point.
It
It's-
does
it's-
have some revolving elements with
Yeah.
program income, and so we have to be careful not to use
Yeah.
words that have a certain accounting meaning.
Oh, thank you.
Right, and so, we, unlike the early childhood education, I mean, we're investing a significant amount of money in this arena. It's definitely grown lately, and this is another significant, the budget includes significant funds this year. But we actually don't have a policy saying funding will be annually preserved at this level
No,
over
no.
time. So I think that's probably the sense that we're not gonna reduce it. That's not what the board wants to do, but we don't, it's not technically a policy. If we did create it as a policy, then that might make it more like a trust. Is that the right way to think about that?
No,
It's a word
I'm
you
talking
can
to the
use.
attorney.
Oh, I'm not me.
No, and Free can answer, or Heather can answer if you even put money there, unless you put it aside in a trust by a third party, it wouldn't really be still a trust.
So it'd be more like, we'd call it like a fund.
Fund.
Right.
Not a
Not a
trust.
trust
Okay,
fund.
all right, cool.
Jasmine and I just think that is because it feels a lot like the conversation having related to early childhood investments.
Yes.
The idea is scaling up to a certain level of investment and then putting it within a certain place within our budget so that it's earmarked for that purpose. Any other questions?
It's exciting. Thank you all on the committee for the work.
Good report.
Is everybody hearing what's on the mics?
It's the county manager that we can't hear, she's not up to much.
All right, thanks. All right, thanks, Matt. Thanks, Rachel.
So next we'll transition to public schools achievement gap by Rusty and Brad.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brad Watt. This is Rusty Mao with Performance Management. At your most recent meeting with the schools during the budget request process, there was a number of questions levied by this board. Many were answered, some were not. So we're here today to help hopefully answer many of those for you. What we're not here to do is to diagnose and prescribe. That is not our expertise. We're hoping to inspire some more questions from you and then ask for a little guidance on what we can do next. So a lot of the questions pertain to the achievement gap, and there have been some articles and discussion ongoing in the community about that already. And so we'd like to just kind of lay out very quickly what the achievement gap is at its very most base level, and then explore that. So you'll see here is any significant persistent disparity between subgroups in achievement over time. And so that could be any two groups. That could be between boys and girls, or in the case that we're talking most about today, between our white students and our black students. So this is going to be just briefly technical. I apologize in advance. I do just want to kind of give a brief on some of the sources of information and what we've been doing so far, just so we can be very clear above board. So when you see at the proficiency levels there, so our students take a test at the end of the grade or end of course. If they score a 3, 4, or 5 proficiency level, they're considered to be proficient. So when we say a student was proficient, that means that they fell into one of those 3 proficiency levels. And below that, you'll see the different tests that we levy in various grades that they are given in. So math and reading, all grades 3 through 8, science only, and 5, 8, and high school, there are only 4 tests. If you're in high school full-time with us in North Carolina, you'll take 4 tests during your tenure. And those are listed by biology, English 2, math 1, and math 3. All this information comes from the Department of Public Instruction of the state, as did most of our data. So we worked with our partners. We met with them a few weeks ago, kind of discussed with them what we were going to talk about, got a lot of our questions answered, had a great discussion with them, and I'd like to acknowledge that a lot of them are here today. We have representatives from Buncombe County and Asheville City in the room. And so if there are technical questions that need to be dug into, I may defer you all to them if needed. But you'll also see the various things that we're going to discuss today based on some questions from that last meeting. So we do have the achievement gap between black and white students, between white and all minority students, and then the gap between economically disadvantaged and non-economically disadvantaged students. We're also going to touch on the graduation rate and the growth index that Buncombe County spoke to. One of the big questions that came out was what is the makeup of each of our districts? And so we have a quick summary here. Those numbers are slightly rounded just to make it quick for you. But this is the 2017-2018 makeup of our schools. A lot of the information we're going to show you is going to be over 5 years. And we even know that those populations change and evolve over time. So we're just talking about 2017-2018.
So can you hold on that slide?
Question, sorry. The non-EDS, that basically means kids from affluent families?
Yeah, so EDS is defined here as any student who comes from a family that would qualify for free and reduced lunch.
Okay.
And I can also speak to it a little bit more in a few minutes, but it's very difficult to get at a number. There's a lot of security and privacy around it, so we're not allowed to dig into it too much.
But the EDS number and the non-EDS adds up to 100%.
It does.
So you're one or the other?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions here?
I just don't want people to miss those percentages. 39% in the city, 54% EDS. Right?
All right, I think we're ready.
So when we pivot to thinking about proficiency, it's really a question of how well students are performing. So they take the standardized tests, they're given a level of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the state has defined proficient for your grade level as getting a level 3 or higher. So we'll start to walk you through some of these charts to kind of show what's defined as the achievement gap, but to look at proficiency. So it really starts with a story to take, for example, a particular elementary school, which we've got highlighted here, and you think about all the students that have taken math and have achieved grade level proficiency, so level 3 or higher. And you see that for this school. What we've highlighted here, and we'll continue to build upon this chart to walk you through that, is this is the student subgroup of white students. So you see that grade level proficiency is slightly increasing each year as they advance, and they're just under that 70 mark for the most recent school year. When we think about a gap, what we want to overlay is we want to look at where that line is for the white student subgroup, and then whatever other subgroup that we're comparing to. The entry point into this conversation was particularly for white students and black students. So when we add in that line of black students, we look at their proficiency. So you see that blue line is that exact same measure. It's that percent of students and grade level proficiency, but it really starts to prompt more questions. Why was there that dip in 2016? Why are they improving over time? And it really helps us to start to highlight what you've heard, what you might see in a table, but to try to put it in a little bit more digestible format. So here you can see in that most recent example for this particular elementary school across the white student subgroup, the black student subgroup, most recently in Math EOG, there was a 17-point achievement gap. So that's kind of the concept that we'll walk you through with kind of district level examples. So like I said, this conversation originally started around really focusing on the black student and white student achievement gap. So if we think about Asheville City Schools first, we think about all students. This is just that grade level proficiency for all students over time. You can see that relatively consistent over time. This is the entire district looking at everyone. Now I'm going to pivot to the achievement gap. Again, that top line will be the white student subgroup. The bottom line will be the black student subgroup.
Damn.
So a couple takeaways here. Obviously, there's a drastic achievement gap. It is
Excuse for that.
it is continuing to increase, and you see that most recently it's that 62 points across the district.
So I have a question. Okay, so there's the English and math and biology science tests. So this graph sort of summarizes is like an amalgamation of all of those and an average of all of those, right? So let's say math was higher, but English was lower. This sort of represents an averaging
It's an
of all
aggregate,
those.
aggregate across all
Okay.
subjects across the whole district as reported by DPI.
One point I'd like to make, kind of tie back into the demographics of the county and city. We showed you the numbers for the entirety of the student population. Kindergarten through second grade is not tested and represented here. It's fairly even, we expect, through those grades, but there is, we're using three grades that out. So this only shows our third grade high school, but it is the aggregate of all tests.
Okay, thanks.
So to continue the conversation, it's important to look at both of our school systems. Within Buncombe County, again, this is the achievement of all of our students. So again, relatively consistent over time. They're around that 60% mark. When you look at the achievement gap in Buncombe County, I'll jump there now.
Yeah. It's no excuse.
So here you see not as drastic, but still a stark achievement gap, even in Buncombe County schools, between our white students and our black students. Like I said, these charts really help prompt more questions, and it makes us start to ask the questions of, why is there still a gap? What underlying factors, systemic or non-systemic, might contribute, and why do we see these differences? And we'll come back to that. So we pivoted from the original topic of white and black students. We wanted to say, okay, we know that the demographic makeup of the two school systems is different. So we wanted to look at white students compared to minority students and see what trends we see there. So you've seen the kind of trends for all students as a whole. So I'll show the Asheville City School. This is white students is that top line again, and then you see the minority students with that most recent achievement gap. Now I'll jump to Buncombe County schools here.
Wait, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm not completely following this slide. So this is white and minority students in the city district. It didn't the previous slide show that it was a 62-point gap?
This is
So
all
that-
minority
this is-
students.
Okay, so Hispanic. Okay, all right. Thank you. I'm sorry. I
That's
just,
it.
I just missed it for a second.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Thank you. I'm caught up now.
The definition of minority is
Okay.
Asian, Black, Hispanic,
Got it.
Caribbean.
Oh, excuse me.
Okay.
And then
Here,
Where does multiracial students fall?
multiracial, so Alaskan Pacific Islander, multiracial, and other would be.
Those are
Would be
counted.
on this,
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
They're counted as part of minority students.
not black.
So only white non-Hispanic students would count in the white
That'd be correct.
yes.
What about Ukrainian?
Those do typically get picked up into the white non-Hispanic subgroup. As far as I'm aware, with the Department of Public Instruction data, you can't break out that white subgroup further.
Well, if it does break out, I'm not saying that it would for that group, but it could break out on the EDS. And I'm assuming you're going to be showing that to us.
And then I'll show the same chart, white and minority students for Buncombe County schools.
So
So you
in
basically,
both cases, when you aggregate all non-white students, the gap shrinks by about 20 points.
it's about a 50%, looks like about a 50% improvement in Buncombe County over Asheville City,
So-
I'm guessing.
So, sorry.
That's it. Okay.
And your other slides might show this too, but part of the dynamic with the gap is that the white students in the city schools are actually performing better, which creates a bigger gap, right? So it doesn't,
Okay.
So just be aware of that because, I mean, the gap is bad, but part of the math of that is that the students in the city district who are white are overperforming compared to the county and the state, so that makes the gap bigger too.
Can we go back one
Also,
slide?
looks like they're on a decline a little bit though.
So the white students are performing at around
Still
80 versus what was it,
69.
69?
Yeah,
So
count.
10-point differential in the performance of
Back that
white
up again.
students.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
So the minority students in the city are doing around 40 or a little bit less. Now go to the county again. So they're in the high 40s instead of around 40.
Are you gonna overlay these on EDS or
So we will come to that, and we're, next section is EDS.
part of our job is to get way ahead of
Yeah.
Still.
All right.
you? Sorry.
Let's okay, yeah, good point. Keep going. Hand it over to Brad.
And so I touched on a minute ago,
Very good.
some of the information that ties into students that are categorized as economically disadvantaged is limited. So if you walk into school today, a lot of times the principals aren't even allowed to know the student is on the pre-religious lunch. And so it is hard for them as educators to identify needs that extra intervention until something more prescriptive is coming from that student specifically. Additionally, information that allows us to kind of pull a multiple indicator, so I couldn't tell you necessarily economically disadvantaged within the white subgroup, within the minority subgroup, and the black subgroup. A lot of that information is just beyond us right now. It's something we cannot access. I don't know if that's something we have on the horizon. We're optimistic because that would provide a lot of information. However, what we do have here is just a whole student body look of, in both school districts, the economically disadvantaged students versus their non-EDS counterparts and how they do up. So here it's Asheville City Schools. You'll see again a fairly large gap. It is worth noting that to Chairman Bennett's point, the non-EDS students are scoring higher than even any other group shown so far, and much higher than the state average. And then here for Buncombe County, there's a slightly less, smaller achievement gap. The non-EDS students not scoring quite as high, or the proficiency percentage is not quite as high as what I would say. So we also heard input from the local school districts on graduation rate. So I want to take a minute and just make sure that we have a good understanding of graduation rate and how it can line up and sometimes not line up with other information we shared today. So when you hear a graduation rate reported, you often hear the term the 4-year cohort. So what that does is if you enter into one of our high schools in North Carolina in 9th grade, you are a member of that high school's cohort. If you leave the district through a certain number of approved means, like transfer to another district, et cetera, and can provide documentation, you are removed from that cohort. Otherwise, you're responsible for that student 9th to 12th. So it looks at the number of students who started with that school in 9th grade, what percentage of them graduate in 4 years. And so that's what we talk about when we talk about graduation rate. It is also worth noting that graduation rate and proficiency are not directly tied together. Mentioned earlier, you only take 4 standardized tests across your 20 plus credits in high school. So you could very theoretically fail all 4 of those or not achieve proficiency all 4 of those tests, graduate on time fine.
So just to drill down on that for a second, I mean, do we understand that there are children who are scoring, say, a 2, starting from the earliest time they're tested, and they continue advancing grade to grade to grade? They're graduating high school having passed with that level of proficiency throughout their K-12 experience.
It is completely plausible. Some of that longitudinal data tracking those students over time is something we'd very much like to get into. We just have not. That's a lot. That's logistically is a very difficult thing to do.
But there's swaths of hundreds of kids who
Yes.
are struggling at this level and yet moving from grade to grade, and then
So my mother's an educator, and I've been meeting with educators a lot recently. I'd also like to mention that this is a point in time. This is one day. They sat and took the test. There's evidence that also shows if you don't eat breakfast that morning, you're going to lose 20 points.
sure.
So they could be, I mean, these are good numbers. These tests are reliable, but they're just hard to tie influences.
But if you've missed a meal, you're struggling in different ways. I mean, I
Absolutely.
think that when we're looking at the number of children struggling profoundly.
But you know what bothers me is one thing that nobody talks about. Since these tests have been in place, we've so dumbed them down that I'm concerned about the kids who get fours out. You know, who are we putting on the streets out of our schools today? And we're spending a heck of a lot of money, but we're not getting any return for it. Especially in the city. It's horrible for 4,300 kids what they're doing. You know, I question the leadership and everything else. What's going on?
So we've also provided here the graduation rate between white students and black students in both of our local education authorities for you. You'll see a little bit more fluctuation over time in a lot of the Asheville City Schools graphs. Part of that is just because significantly smaller student population, those fluctuations are a little bit more sensitive. Relatively stable over the 5 years, almost considered a little bit of a nuance in 2016 there. Graduation rate in Buncombe County seems to be trending upward.
Any thoughts on the drop in 17 and 18 from BCS that y'all are here? Is that a low number, or is there anything you can think of that? And I don't mean to put you on the spot. You can get back to us. It's just kind of thanks.
I want to circle back around to Commissioner Beach-Ferrara's comment about proficiency. I spent about 12 years of my career in adult education and adult literacy, and this was a problem that had been in existence for the beginning of educational time, of students being passed from grade to grade to grade. And if I'm understanding from kind of being inundated in the educational world to some degree, that parents still have to agree to a child being held back. So some of these numbers, I think, could potentially be reflective that there wasn't parental support to hold them back in order to increase their proficiency on their test scores. So I know that probably can't be fleshed out because those are family decisions, but definitely something to take into account, that a family could simply make that decision for their child and still impact these numbers at the end of the day.
And this is the graduation rate, same school district, same time. This is the difference here between white and all minority students.
So at the presentations from the schools, you heard about growth specifically from Buncombe County. And it's important to understand the interaction of proficiency and growth and look at both of those in tandem. Because the concept of growth is that regardless of a student's background, regardless of that support, you can improve them where you get them on August 1, and you can have them in a better place grown at the end of May. So that's why there's that emphasis there. So when we think about this, growth is truly the academic progress made over time. And we'll look at that. The state has some pretty sophisticated tools to look at what was the state average for growth and who's growing more, kind of faster than the state average, and who's growing less, a little bit slower than the state average. So if we think about proficiency and growth, you want your students ultimately to be highly proficient, but also continuing to learn, whether it's to Commissioner Whitehead's points, a 4 and 5 student continuing to grow. So if you think about this matrix that we've outlined here, high proficiency and high growth, things are kicking good. Those students are learning and they're also growing. If you have high proficiency but lower than average growth, you might start to ask some questions. Why is that? What's going on here? These students are performing well, but they're not growing as much. Similarly, if you have high growth but low proficiency, okay, was it an input? Why they were, from the prior grade, the proficiency was low. But what's going on that they're growing? What strategies are working? And then the last example would be low growth and low proficiency. That might be a cause for alarm. Okay, what's going on here? What can we look into? So I want to show you this similar concept with our actual Buncombe County, both school systems, schools mapped. So this is a distribution. Each point there represents an individual school. blue triangles are Asheville City schools, the orange circles are Buncombe County schools. This is kind of where they lie as a school on the proficiency scale compared to the state average and same percent of students that are at grade level proficiency, and then on a growth from left to right of low growth lower than state average or high growth higher than state average.
So the top left, kids test well, they're just not improving.
At those schools, yeah, they're a higher percentage is at grade level proficiency, but they're growing slower or less than that state average. And let me take this a step further so that I can give you that context of what percent of our schools fall where. So if you think about that upper right, that high proficiency, high growth, you see a third of Asheville City schools are in that quadrant, half of Buncombe County schools are in that quadrant. When you think about the upper left, that high proficiency but lower growth, you've got over half of Asheville City schools are in that high proficiency, and about a quarter of Buncombe County schools. That lower right, that low proficiency but high growth, you see 12% of Buncombe County schools. And then in that low proficiency, low growth, you see 11 and 12% respectively.
Is this for 1 year's data?
This is for 2018 data, correct? One thing that's important to note that's a little bit nuanced here is when you look at this in this aggregate level, it doesn't tell the same story as those achievement gaps that we showed you.
Right.
At that aggregate level, we are doing some great things in Buncombe County, but we really need to make sure that we're still tracking those targeted examples and making sure we're trying to improve everyone and focus strategies there. If you think about overall, there's the concept of high proficiency in this upper half. You know, that's good. Our kids are at 4s and 5s and are performing well. There's also high growth. We want to make sure our kids are improving while they're with our school systems. But our goal ultimately, we want to make sure our kids are moving into that upper right quadrant where they are performing high and they're continuing to grow while they're with us.
Forgive me if you covered this. Can this be broken out by race? The proficiency and growth index?
I don't believe that the growth index can be,
Okay.
but that's a great follow-up question. So we want to leave you with next steps, and we want to really talk about what you all want to see from this, where you want to go. Obviously, schools ultimately own the achievement, the results, the scores. But if you think about, that's only half the story. Commissioner Beach-Ferrara, you mentioned somebody missing a meal. There's a lot of inputs that go into the school system, and it's inputs up until kindergarten, and it's inputs every single day. So if we think about where the county has already a pretty strategic focus, it's things like affordable housing, it's early childhood education, it's educational enrichment. That was one thing the school specifically mentioned to us, more contact points, after school programming. Immediately on the right, transportation, getting the kids there, public health, public safety, and child protection. But it's really important to note that all the things that we focus on as a county really come back to inputs to that education. And we're uniquely positioned to focus on those elements.
And then I mentioned as we began, we've been meeting with the schools. We've met one time now with some of their staff members that were well ingrained in their analytics and also their curriculum. Both parties have agreed to continue working with us. That's something we would like to see. We'd like to use that relationship, leverage the assets we have here to kind of provide them some support, dive into that analysis a little bit deeper with them. This is just the surface. We know that there's years and years of data into. We can track a student over time. We can look into a single test and look at the 4 sub areas that are in there and see if maybe, a student didn't do well on math because, actually it's the problem solving that's thrown for a curveball because they're reading online. There's a lot of opportunity out there for both the educational authorities and us to kind of make some waves and understand and then better equip our educators with tools and information to intervene as early as possible and keep them from falling behind kindergarten through 4th, and that just ripples down to the next year of their education. So we would love to hear your thoughts on what other questions you might have now, what we can come back to you with, can do with our partners.
I appreciate this presentation and the feel like it's helped kind of really sharpen the focus on a lot of the questions we had during our public meeting recently. And it sounds good to keep drilling into that data, but I also feel like it's incumbent upon us to connect what we're seeing here very clearly into the data we've gotten from the state of Black Asheville and the state of Black Buncombe County, which shows comparable and frankly, deeply troubling kind of systemic disparities for Black people in our community from the moment they're born through the entirety of their lives. I haven't seen our local maternal mortality data by race, but I have
It's bad, yeah.
So I think it's incumbent upon us at the level of thinking about this sort of at a community-wide level to be certainly partnering with the school systems, but taking that much broader view and saying, for the 80% of Black children in the city school system, for instance, who are not scoring at grade level proficiency, there's 730 or so kids, it's a crisis. The house is on fire. And certainly, and again, I think you just connected those dots, but just to reiterate it sort of from a commission perspective, is I certainly see the investments in the work we're doing around early child education and the emphasis on that being trauma informed and starting at birth, not just age 4. All of that is informed by what we know seems to show the possibility to move the needle for folks. But I don't know how there's a lot of conversations rumbling across the community about the achievement gap numbers. I don't think it's a lack of caring. I don't think it's a lack of concern. But I don't know how to look at this and say anything except that it's on fire. These are crisis level numbers that speak to people struggling and suffering on the other side of them. So I don't know. I just want to make sure that we're not, I like data personally, but there's sort of rabbit holes that can draw us down, and making sure that we're kind of always centering the people in our community on the other side of these numbers, in the way that this is absolutely connected to what we know about the experience of being Black in Buncombe County throughout people's lifespan in terms of structural issues and inequities. So that's just weighing heavily on my mind and heart as we kind of digest this information.
So I think I'm gonna have some specific questions. One is I want to thank you guys. This is what y'all do.
Yes.
Okay. Y'all like it. Y'all like it.
Occasionally, yes.
Yeah, you do. You can. It's like you asked the question about, you can take and dig down and go this, and this, because that's what you do. And so what I want to try to do is, as hard as it is to pull some emotion out of this and go to that, because this is about facts and about fixing. You're not gonna throw money at this problem. You're gonna have to dig down and find out. Like we talk about, kids not eating. Some don't eat because a parent don't tell them to eat. By gosh, you're gonna eat before you leave the house, and some don't eat because they don't have any food. And so that does affect the testing. Because we have some money set aside for certain things, it makes us that much more accountable to get this really good information. Because if not, we'll make emotional decisions with that money, and it's very easy to do. And it's not that it's necessarily a wrong thing, because I'm gonna feel good about it because my heart drives me in a certain direction. I'm equally concerned about making sure that the poverty that drives a lot of this, which goes beyond color, I want to make sure that both of those are being addressed. The poverty side, the minority side, all of our children that are struggling. So we're going to have more data on you said 730 kids, that's specific. It'd be good for us to drill down into, as far as you can drill down, because of without, you can only do so much because of privacy. Drilling even farther down, discovering things we wouldn't discover. Y'all can do that. I have, it has bothered me. It bothers a lot of people, I believe, in in trying to help these kids make better choices from a career standpoint. You know, and how are they tested? You know, I'm talking all kinds of people that, you know, need HVAC people. I mean, there's so many people out there that could go to work and get in programs and be helped. And I'm wondering, you know, do the tests even are we even testing for that anymore? I don't know. I don't know if we're testing to see proficiency on people with their hands, as opposed to, I know math and reading are totally different. That's rocket science. Totally different math. But some people are, they're great at, you know, math and Legos and robotics, but they struggle with reading, and so they test bad, you know. But I want to make sure that we're digging more in here. You know, we talk about food. I'll just say this. I wasn't able to get it happen, but my grandson told me, he said, Papa, why did they take away the club salad, you know, from our food? So the nutrition that the kids are getting in schools, it'd be good for me to know whether, you know, how does this affect you know, some, you know, poor kids need to go home with a full belly because they don't get their dinner, you know, and if we really want to fix these, we're going to have to drill into some of that, that data that these guys can do. But diet, I mentioned that, you know, the middle school diner that, you know, that's done it, you know, there are some kids being fed in the evenings, you know, measuring how, you know, these kids are being taken care of and helped, to me is important. You know, those numbers are scary. I think somebody said you can't, you know, you're not going to paint educators that's not caring. The numbers are numbers, and we got to figure out a way to fix them together and not panic over that. And I think these guys can deliver on some of those numbers. So, yeah, I guess. Just kind of,
I want to thank you for what you've done, for what you're bringing forth. But what's most frustrating for me is we've known these facts for years. We've seen it coming. I spent 8 years on the school board. I spent 16 years on the university boards in the state. We have seen this information. But darn it, it's time for us to do something about it. You know, we can't continue to put our heads in the sand and just let these numbers go. 62 points. It's just unrealistic when you look at this and you think of the money that we put in schools here. We spend, over $90 million when you look at the city, county, and Buncombe Tech, and all are going down in enrollment. You know, but we need to, it's time, and I'm glad to see it. And of course, we're putting things in place, sure, like the pre-K, affordable housing. We're looking at attacking this. But we've got to do more inside the schools. You know, you can't walk away from that. And when I look at what's the numbers and what's going on in these schools, look, folks, I've been fighting this all my life, and it's still not getting any better. I'm beginning to wonder, was I better off in the segregated schools? You know, I went to college, graduated with honors. I mean, I'm beginning to wonder what, I don't know. It's frustrating for me, but it's saying I can't sit here and be quiet anymore. You know, we have got to do something about it as a community. And we do a good job of talking. But folks, it's time now for us to start walking the walk because we know what needs to be done. Now let's do it. I mean, I'm just tired of going to meetings talking about equity and all this. Look, I can teach the course on that. I've been to so many over the years. But nothing is being done. We're not getting anywhere. We're just forgetting about the black population in this county when it comes to education. And if I hurt feelings, I'm sorry. It's time. Because my feelings have been hurt for 74 years every time I look at this.
thanks to both school systems for being so willing to turn over your data for the county to dig into. I know sometimes that's not easy to want to turn things over and not know what the result's going to be. So thank you for being courageous in doing that. What I want to stress to all of us is how we have to be very cognizant moving forward with the data that we have, that I'm afraid where we're heading is going to impact our K-12 system in a very undesirable way. I think that a great number of our educators, their morale is at rock bottom after talking to a number of school board members and employees across both districts. And I want to be sure that in whatever way we begin to rally around and address these challenges in our community, that we are making sure that we are retaining our incredible teaching staff, our assistants, our administrators across both school systems, because without them, we can't do this work. And we can look at other data and see students are not entering the teaching profession anymore. Those numbers are declining. Nobody wants to be a teacher. This is probably part of the reason why. And I want to ensure that we are very cautious in how we wrap our community around our public schools and our teachers to work towards a solution. I mean, we're addressing hundreds of years of structural racism, not only in our two schools, but across our country when it comes to dealing with the public education crisis that we have. It is indeed a community problem. It's not going to take one meeting for us to solve it. And I want to be sure that we are careful in saying we're going to address it now, and there are other ways that we can do this. What I would like to challenge my colleagues to do is to spend time, and I'm not talking 15, 20 minutes in a public school, a whole day. I think if you haven't done that, you're going to be really surprised what you see. The second grade teacher who is literally picking up the child who didn't have dinner the night before and is lashing out because they're hungry, and they're interrupting the whole day, and they pick them up and they hug them and they love them. That's what's happening in our schools. And if we're not in there seeing it, it's easy for us to wag our fingers and lay a lot of blame in areas that we don't know because it's not our day-to-day. I agree. Food is a huge problem on testing day. They haven't had a meal that night before they take a test, but it's those same kids who haven't had a meal at night every single night before they come to school. So I also want to be careful, like you said, when you look at that testing, it's a point in time and how we led to that one point in time. I mean, this is a long-term solution. And I know people are tired of saying it's long-term, but I think we have to roll our sleeves up and really say, this cannot be addressed in 6 months. But our entire community, and I challenge our entire community today, not just those in this room, to say we're part of the solution and we're going to help. That's all I have to say.
Thanks. Thanks for the data. Thanks to the schools for helping to prepare this too. And for both districts, I think they've been very forthcoming with the data and done great analysis on these issues. But it's great to have it all consolidated as well. To kind of so thanks to you guys for working to do that for the conversation today. These are, as I said before, these are not new problems. They've been with us a long time, and some things have gotten better. Some things have not gotten better at all. And I agree that our responsibility in this area is to think about both what we can do to support the schools in the best ways we can to address these issues within the classrooms. And then, but I also think it's very important that we be thinking about these issues and what's happening outside the classrooms. That's driving a lot of these results, because I think a lot of these dynamics have to do with the environments that the kids are living in, and that they arrive in the schools, and the schools work hard to do the best job they can to work with them on their academic skills and development. But they're dealing with what the world that these kids are living in, So I think there's a lot of things that we can do also outside the schools and need to be doing more on to address some of those issues. I think one of the, and I know there's a lot of, as well there should be, a lot of privacy concerns around the data and individual kids and stuff like that. I do think it would be interesting if there is a way to do some additional analysis, basically kind of looking at neighborhoods, right? And like, because my theory is that if you do that and like kids from different neighborhoods, I mean, most of Buncombe County is a very safe county. Our law enforcement does a great job, but there are some neighborhoods in our county that have dramatically higher levels of crime and where things happen on a routine basis that most of us never see or very rarely see. And so, how are the kids from those neighborhoods doing in our schools? I think if we do that kind of analysis, we'll see that there's a very powerful correlation between kids who struggle with schools and some of those environmental conditions they're dealing with. I mean, both school districts have been very clear to us that mental health concerns are very high on their list of things they want to focus on more. But a lot of those mental health concerns are growing out of problems that kids have in their neighborhoods and in their life outside of schools. So, and those are things that we can do something about. So it means working with schools, but it also means working with the sheriff's department and the Asheville Police Department to do things to help address public safety in some of these neighborhoods that are not as safe as they should be. So this is not even a meeting where we're going to make decisions, but I'm glad we're having the discussion. I know different people have been doing different things to attend different meetings, but I thought it would be great for us to spend a little bit more time having a commission-wide discussion about some of the data. So to be continued. Any other comments from commissioners before we do have some other items we need to deal with before the meeting this evening?
Bernie, like what you said right there, the data's good, but I think the community and each school, I mean, we go out into my District 3, Candler. I believe one school pulls the other school down. I'd like to see the data from communities, and I think we will see a lot of things change right there. And it goes right back to what everybody said. And I think Bernie hit the nail on the head right there, talking of the different communities of what they're facing.
Well, and y'all can do that.
It's possible. We are looking into that. Some of it gets down to it's the granular is like the feeder zone for a given school, but it could cut a neighborhood in half. So we're going to continue to explore what options we have to get to that level for you.
So I just want to sort of say this. The data is critical, and you guys can, I'm sure, can do whatever we ask you. And then, what we talk about is strategy. We strategize things to death. We do it all the time. And this requires, I believe, some specific goals. And I'm going to be just basic with what Commissioner Edwards said. Okay. So my mind went when you talk about, people being hungry when they get ready to test. My mind went, feed them. Why do we let a kid take a test that's hungry? Well, because it's scheduled for them. So why is it scheduled for them? Feed them, let them take it later. I mean, if you want to help the child, or do you want to, stay focused on the rules, or do you want to help the child? Okay, and I'm not saying we can do this, but I'm saying if a child is hungry, feed the child. Don't feed the child a salad because somebody says they got to eat a salad. Feed that child lasagna. Can I get an amen from somebody back? I'm telling you, feed that kid. Forget the rules. You want to fix this? Knock the walls down. Y'all have heard me say this before. You want to feed kids? I got churches that'll feed kids. Knock the walls down. You want communities fed? There are people that'll feed these children. Knock the walls down. You want to help black children? Knock the walls down. Open the doors and and I don't know what we can do, but knock the walls down. Is it because we need to feed kids? Would it help with growth feeding kids? I don't know. Would it? But, could we look at that? Is there data associated with that? Would that help? I don't know. And I'm preaching, so I'm going to have to pass the hat and go on. But I'm just saying that in getting in specific communities, and Brownie mentioned something that we really need to look more at too, is that I personally don't like the term public education. I like talking about kids, and I like talking about schools. I like talking about Inca, I like talking about Johnston, and I like talking about certain Nashville High, I like talking about certain schools, and how are they doing and how are they performing, and trying to knock those walls down too. Just, and this is gonna, you're gonna get a little bit of preaching from my colleague, Commissioner White.
Not a little bit, a lot.
And you're gonna get it from me, who's and our background shape what we do and who we are, and I come out of a very poor place in southern West Virginia, in a coal mining community, and it drives our goals. Commissioner Whiteside come out of a different community. Both of us have the same goals. But you guys can find this information. Sometimes y'all get a bad rap, because people don't really understand what you do. Okay, well, I get what you do, but we need to give you more specifics. County manager can help with that, and she, very. Her mind's spinning right now, and but I get it down to a simple goal. You got to get out of the strategy. You got to pick the goal. Okay, so let's just say, and I know we're on a time schedule, but we got time. Let's just say that an issue is kids being hungry at school. Okay, let's say that's our issue. Then we develop a strategy in feeding those children. Okay, if we think that feeding those children will help their grades and close the gap, when we feed all those kids, we don't shame them when they ain't got money to pay for their meals. We make sure they're fed, and in Buncombe County we make sure they're fed. I don't know how to do that. You asked for a question. That's my question. Okay, how do we come up with a specific goal? If we believe that we believe that would help our children, help our schools, help education, help them test better, help them go home feeling better. We do some of that. We dabble in it with the homework diners. And I've been to those. I've been in these schools, and that works. That works. The families that are in there, it really does work. Everybody's excited and happy, but does it help their schools?
So we do need to wrap this up, but I think just kind of in concluding thoughts, I think, I don't have a specific schedule or anything like that to propose, but I do, obviously we're in the backside of our budget cycle. There's important decisions left to be made now. There might be others once the state figures out where they're going to land on all these different issues. So there's some important decisions that we're going to need short term, but part of it is that I think we talk a lot with our partners from the schools a lot during the budget process, but then when we're all done with the budget, I think we're all like, oh, thank goodness that's over. And, but I think we need to spend more time talking about these issues on a more ongoing basis. So I think that's one thing I would certainly like to be supportive of. Again, we don't have to figure out the structure for that, today. But I do think we need to be thinking about specific policies. A lot of things work great day in, day out. And so, but what are the additional things, both in the schools, that working with the schools we can do, and then what are the other specific things that are outside the schools that we need to be looking at that will make a direct impact on these issues, and probably a lot of other things going on in these kids' lives too that we can do better on. So those are my concluding thoughts. Anything else before we from any other commissioners before we move on to the next item this meeting? All right. Thanks everybody, and thank you gentlemen
Thanks, guys. Good stuff.
Thank you for your time and the opportunity to share.
Thank you.
Very good.
Appreciate it.
So Don is making his way. While he's making his way, I'll say that we have decided that we'll meet more often in schools as we continue our research. Thanks, Jerry. I was just saying that we have agreed that we'll meet more often with educational partners throughout the year to get more frequent updates, and it's just not around budget. As Rusty and Brad continues their analysis, we'll continue meeting with schools and bring that to you.
Great. Mr. Ward.
Hello. Hey, how you doing? Hey,
How-
you sure I went before that? As you're all aware, we received our letter from the local government commission telling us that they want to know how we're going to address the findings and that we need to respond within 45 days of the letter. So I have gone through and put together a letter in response, and I provided you all a copy of that. I didn't know if you would like to go through each one of those responses and findings, or how you would like to.
Yeah, sure. Why don't we just briefly, I mean, some of them might just be a couple of comments, others might be more in depth, so just go ahead.
Perfect. Okay, so the first finding that they had was on the schedule of expenditures and federal and state awards. Basically, we overstated some revenue on that report, and that was a result of a direction that the treasurer had given us or had provided prior county staff who were no longer here. They relay that information, so we were unaware of the change. So we have put together a item on our quarterly checklist so that we will review guidance that's provided by the LGC, or the treasurer's office, or whoever it may be. And then in addition, at the end of the year, we will go through and make sure that any procedures that may have changed with related to the CSUP, we will pick those up and make sure that's taken. Second finding was related to the other post-employment benefits. They're saying we have no written policy to review and approve schedules and journal entries and that sort of thing. We are in the process of developing procedures for that. We'll ensure that all journal entries and urine work papers prepared and reviewed by 2 separate staff members with adequate knowledge and understanding of the subject matter. Again, this goes back to we had turnover, so we had people missing that weren't able to do this sort of thing. The third item is wire transfers. The auditors recommended the county formalize and document its monitoring and administrative functions, banking website, particularly as it relates to wires and initiation approval of those wires. I went out and verified with Wells Fargo that we already have those in place, so any freeform wires or templates that to be modified or created require dual approval, so there's no way that somebody can go out and create a wire and also approve it. Apparently there was one wire that was a legitimate wire that actually was initiated and approved by the same person in 2018, so that can never happen again.
Good.
And are wire transfers pretty rare in an organization like the county? Is like for
No.
big payments, or are they like routine, small payments, happens all the time?
Brownie.
Yeah.
Brownie.
I mean, every time we send money to schools or cities or anything like that, it's a wire transfer.
With big businesses like the county, it's billions of dollars. It's wire transferred all over the country, hourly almost now.
So these are not necessarily senior staff who need to approve these, because these are routine and a lot of them are not necessarily large
Well,
figures.
most of the wires are set up as a template, so it takes one person to create the template, another person to approve it. And then once it's approved as a template, anybody with access to wires, which we have that list and it's been verified who needs access to that, can initiate that template and just send that out. So those are the routine payments going to Black Mountain, Asheville, the schools, that sort of thing. The fourth item was around stormwater surety bonds. There was no reconciliation going on between the planning department and finance department, again, as a result of turnover in their department as well as in finance. We have already met with planning and we are reinitiating the conversations and making sure that they're giving us information and we're reconciling so we can avoid that finding in the future. The fifth one was around those insurance policies and getting the funds back into the county. That was a very unique situation. It was a one-time item, and we have put procedures in place now, and we also have a monthly and annual checklist to make sure that any unusual items like that, we'll make sure that they get reported properly. Yeah, that was just an oversight on staff's part, so that will not happen again.
So we don't need any new policies on insurance. We just need to make sure our existing policies are correctly followed, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Construction in progress. There were some assets that were in 2017 were not reported. They were still sitting out there as basically in progress, and they were substantially complete. Should have been recorded and on our books as an actual asset. We only have quarterly meetings to discuss the projects, where they are with budget, where they are in progress, and then finance staff is going to regularly meet with budget staff to discuss where are we at with budget, are these projects actually complete, so that we can get them recorded in a timely fashion, so we can eliminate that kind of
Does that require any change to current policy for that?
It was just with everything going on and the turnover of staff, duties that should have been getting done on a regular basis and were getting done in years past just fell through the cracks. So now we've got people in place. We are in the process of doing cross-training, so we have multiple people that are aware of what's going on, what needs to get done on a monthly basis. We're updating all of our checklists on quarterly, monthly, and annual basis. All those are being updated so that we can make sure that as we go through them, everything's getting done. And as things change, those checklists are getting updated. And that's what a lot of this is just making sure that we are updating the checklist, adding new items and that sort of stuff. Management time cards, those were not getting updated. That was the old system. Workday has eliminated that problem because they go through the system and they get approved. With the exception of the sheriff, the register of deeds, and who's our other elected official? The sheriff, register of deeds.
Does it?
Clerk of court?
Clerk of court. Yeah. Everybody else, it's approved by someone. Procurement card transaction limit increases. This finding is actually, it should, in my opinion, should not have been a finding. The department director requested the limit. They requested it through accounts payable, who then relayed that message to procurement, who then took care of it for them. According to our policy, the department director is supposed to do that in writing directly to procurement. So that was the breakdown. We are developing a electronic workflow that is in the process. We're working with performance management to get that up and running so that whoever initiates it, it will go to the department director, they will approve it, and then it will go on to procurement. So,
I think it's okay to, for these findings to be in here because it creates conversation between the departments and keeps it out. It's not necessarily a bad thing.
No, I mean, in my mind, that's a silly one.
Yeah, I'm with you. Man.
Yeah. Especially when we had 18 of them, they could have left one out.
Come on, man.
Then we have the revenue recognition. The auditors recommend that the county formalize and document procedures of the recognition of revenue posted in the general ledger. This has to do with the different systems out there. There's automatic transfers that post to the general ledger. They want to make sure that we have procedures in place so that somebody is reviewing that before the automatic transfer happens. So we're working on that. We will have a reconciliation process to ensure that what went in is correct. So it may occur after the fact, but at least we will be able to verify that what is in there is correct. And that will satisfy the auditors. The auditors recommended that we formalize policies and procedures over general disbursements, implementing monitoring and procedures to ensure controls are operating efficiency. Again, this is being corrected with Workday. As invoices are entered, they go through the workflow, and the proper people are authorizing. In the prior system, it could have been put in and wasn't necessarily getting approved, and you couldn't see where it was approved, even though it was approved. So we are eliminating that problem. Invoice accrual. This is just a matter of, again, not updating the checklist to make sure that you're doing the right things at the end of the year. So we will make sure that the checklists are updated, that there's formal policy in place, so we're ensuring that we are getting the invoices that are for the correct year posted to the correct year. Because if they come in after June 30, depending on if they're for 2019 or if they're for 2020, we've got to make sure we're pulling those back. We did not have proper procedures in place, so there was a couple invoices that should have been back in 2018, paid in 2019, so we're fixing it. The payroll accrual, the system was set up to do an automatic payroll accrual every pay period, the new system. The auditors looked at that, they tested it, and found that it didn't necessarily accrue the right amount. So the simple solution is we turned off that automatic accrual, and we will go back to doing it the old-fashioned way, which is calculating it at year end, which is all you really need to do is calculate it at year end, so that we're accruing the correct amount. EMS billing, the auditors recommend we develop and implement procedures and controls to ensure complementary controls over EMS billing functions are properly implemented. So we are scheduling a meeting with EMS departments later this month. We're going to sit down and meet with our collections representatives, EMS staff, and get in sync to make sure we are ensuring they have the proper controls and our controls are complementary to those. The Sheriff's Office manual check process. They have checks for when an inmate is released in the middle of the night. They need to give them their funds. So there is a locked cabinet in the detention center that has a camera on it that is behind locked doors. However, those checks are already signed, and according to our auditors, too many people have access to them. We do utilize positive pay, which means if somebody were to write the check and not put it through positive pay, which notifies the bank the check has been written, we would get notified and we would stop payment on that. So there are safeguards in place. This finding, I don't know, we're going to meet with sheriff's staff in a couple weeks and talk about, are these procedures adequate? And if so, then we can just make the argument with the auditors that we believe we have enough safeguards in place. If not, we'll figure out what the proper safeguards should be. But that will be addressed. Expense reimbursements. So in the previous system, expense reports were not getting approved for department heads by county manager or county manager's designee. With Workday, those now go through the automatic workflow process. The documentation has to be attached, and they are going to go to, like mine, to Apple's, and she would approve it. It works just fine. Hopefully she approves
Right.
it.
It's not a given.
Hopefully she approves it.
Now, who approves apples?
Nobody formally approves it, but my staff reviews it and makes sure that they are appropriate and within policy. If they were not, then I would have a conversation. And if that was a problem, then I would have a conversation with you.
Good.
Well, that won't be a problem. The next two findings are related to the single audit. The first one is because it was late. So our response to that is we'll make sure it's not late, which is ensuring that we get an audit done on time, you know, as long as we don't have significant turnover, the ERP system, and all the other things that are going on, we should be fine. That is my commitment to all of you, so we will get the audit done on time. And then the final item is the public school capital fund. There is a report that has to be filed within 60 days of project completion, and they found that a couple of them had not been, so we're just making sure that we have good communication with schools and we're aware of what projects are getting done so that we can make sure that report gets filed. Even though we don't have to file the report, we have to make sure it gets filed. And that would be all the responses. Any questions on any of those?
It requires everyone.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. You'll
When
notice
do you
there's a
need that
signature line for
signature?
everybody. So I've already signed the original, so I will just pass this around.
Bring it around.
I'd like to just hear your input on one question. which is sort of what's your assessment of the totality of these findings? This is a much more in-depth process than we've had with past year audits, and I'm finding it very helpful. But you look at these 18 findings, what's your kind of overall
I
kind of
think
diagnostic or assessment?
it really just speaks to the fact that when you have significant amount of turnover within staff, coupled with a new software system, things will fall through the cracks. And if you don't have somebody that is coming in and making sure that everything's getting done, you will have a significant amount of findings. These are not catastrophic findings. These are easily fixed. And a lot of them are related to the software, and some of them are being fixed by the new software. So it's one of those things where we're just going to work through it and get them all done. It doesn't cause me really any concern as far as, oh my God, we had 17, 18 findings. What the heck's going on? It's more of, okay, these are items that can easily be fixed, and we'll address them and move forward. And it'll be great.
Thanks.
All right.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Warren.
Thanks.
All right, one last item, which is on the agenda for the meeting this evening. Quick presentation on.
And this one I'm gonna keep.
And I want to give some credit to Mr. Rice, who is with us today, for helping to ask us to look at these policies and talk them through and make sure we're all clear on how we want to handle how the media is, where they're located in our meetings.
Yes, absolutely. So we were asked to review the current policy regarding broadcasting and recording and make some recommendations to improve the policy. So I'm just going to jump right into the recommendations. A basically states the same as the previous policy, and we only add that that anybody basically can film the meeting, but as long as they don't impede on the vision of the audience members. That's what A basically states. B, we met with the fire marshal. They came out with space, and they decided that it needs to be stated somewhere here that we can't block ingress or egress from the meeting room. So we added that to the policy as well. And A, areas around the doors and exits must be kept clear due to fire. So we added that in the B section. In C and D, we added designated zones for media. So you have a C says a short-term media zone located between front right pillar and the commission desk can be used by media, photographers, videographers for a maximum of 10 minutes per meeting. And D, a long-term media zone is located in the back of the room. This area is reserved for permanent placement of cameras by media, photographers, or videographers. And then E basically states that the board reserves the right to designate where any and all recording devices may be placed or displaced at any time during the meeting. It's pretty cut and dry, pretty simple. Is there anything else that you'd like to discuss regarding?
It just keeps everybody together, whether it's Jerry or WLFS, right?
Yeah.
Right,
So
yeah.
it makes it
So
fair
we
to
can say
everybody.
you're in the short-term media zone. You have 10 minutes might be a little short. I might consider 30 minutes. No,
Yeah,
10?
10's long.
All right, 10 it is.
Thinking 5. I mean, basically the idea is to come up and get like a closer in image of the
closer
commission or whatever,
Right.
but not to just hang out there.
Right,
To get a closer up shot or some video footage, but then that's not where we want people just hanging out, because it is kind of in the way it.
Yeah, it's right. in
But we
front.
don't want to stop people from being able to get some.
And also right
some of what
behind
they
where they
need.
traditionally set up, there is like a 3-foot barrier that needs to be, or not barrier, but a 3-foot zone that needs to be clear for fire marshal safety.
Yeah.
For safety.
Okay.
So you can't be setting up and block anybody coming down to the exit. And I can tape that off tonight if you want to kind of see
Oh,
at the meeting. You know. But
I think that would actually be helpful,
Yeah.
just so we all kind of see it, like that's
Right,
what it
visual.
is. But it doesn't need to be permanent, just
Right,
for us, we're
just-
discussing it, people kind of are
Yeah.
clear on where that is.
Right.
That sounds good.
all right, perfect. That's all.
All right. We'll talk about it tonight. Very good. I think that's everything, right?
yes, and we will get back on schedule. We can start previewing our meetings. Unfortunately, we've gotten off cycle with our budget, but we'll get back and we can start previewing what's coming. We'll start that back.
That sounds good, yeah, so we were talking about, the times of these meetings, and what we were sort of thinking is, let's get through the budget, let's get that done, and then we can kind of do an evaluation of, so since we won't have all these budget workshops and stuff.
Right.
Like, when do we just want to have our
Right.
regular pre-meeting time scheduled, now or later in the afternoon, or whatever we decide, so we'll follow up on that once we get the budget done.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
That's it.
Yeah.
See you at 4:30.
Yeah.